Good evening, guys. My name is Ryan Presswell. I'm your criminal investigations instructor for fall 2019, and we're going to be doing several video lectures. So I thought this was a neat way for me to get this stuff across to you without making you review 12 million PowerPoint slides, which I personally don't find to be really enriching for you all. Just kind of more busy work. So when I put this course together, I wanted to make sure that it was relevant and useful and really very hands-on, as hands-on as we can make an online learning platform. So one of the ideas was that occasionally we would do a video lecture, and this week really the lesson itself really lent itself to doing an online lecture. So in case you didn't notice, under the content tab for this practical exercise, you would find a note taker. And so it's a Word document that kind of outlines my actual lecture. If I were doing a lecture in person, I probably wouldn't do that for you, but since we are doing this online, and I can't take questions, I can't slow down, I can't speed up, I just want to make sure that you kind of have an outline for what it is we're talking about. If you'll notice on this one's actually filled out. So under each numeral, you'll see letters. And for those letters, those would normally be blank. But for this one, I'm going to let you have pretty much the keys to the kingdom. So you can kind of choose what it is you want to do with that, whether or not you want to continue watching the video. I hope you do, because really the note taker that I filled out for you is pretty basic. And so it won't necessarily get you what you need. So you'll need to add to it as we go. You'll finish the practical exercise using the information that you've gained from this lecture, and what you will need to do is finish up this PE, and then you will take the quiz for this, and the quiz material will be taken straight from this lecture. So 10 multiple choice, true, false questions, those type of questions. Generally pretty simple using information that we took from here. I'll try to make the quizzes be the types of things that you would see in any type of basic investigators course outside of Midlands. So where you'd actually gain employment with a police department, sheriff's office, even some type of private investigation firm, whether it be health insurance companies, where you'd be investigating health insurance fraud. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. This is the type of test you would take to certify yourself. So when you guys get the final towards the end, and it's 100 multiple choice questions, it's going to be very similar to what you'd see in that realm. And kind of the reason I like doing things that way is because I teach a vocational class at a high school. I've had a lot of success with students leaving me and going elsewhere where they've been prepared for those types of tests. But also I want you to get the academic side via the practical exercises and the writing assignments. So really trying to put the whole course together to be not only academic but also practitioner based, so that you get both sides of investigations, because honestly investigations literally are both. So that's about how this will work, and that's a quick introduction. And so let's jump right into the material. To start off with, investigations are used in order to get to the bottom of something that a patrol officer necessarily couldn't handle. Okay, it's not the patrol officers can handle it. I mean, if they were put in an investigator's role, obviously they could. A lot of the skills that you're going to gain as a patrol officer are going to be very valuable to you as an investigator. So it's not that. It's just that it's a different focus from 9 to 5 and how you're going to be working. And so these are going to be used on more complex issues. So it wouldn't necessarily be one auto burglary. It would be a rash of 10 that have taken through a neighborhood in a course of a week, maybe 2 weeks, where patrol is having to answer calls for service. And somebody really needs to get to the bottom of this so that we can make this stop and get the people responsible for it off the street. When we talk about types of investigations, normally we're talking, a lot of times we're not going to call in an investigator on, say, a misdemeanor. Okay, if we're talking about this rash of larcenies from vehicles that are small scale, once we start adding all of these up, we start looking at the entire criminal enterprise, we're going to reach a felony level. And so a lot of times investigations go into felony statutes, and that's just kind of the nature of the business. We don't want to necessarily pay an investigator, $25, $30 an hour to be investigating misdemeanor crimes. That's something, again, the patrol many times can handle. So more times than not, you're going to be working with felony statutes and law enforcement. If you're going to go over to the private sector, that's a really good way to make a good living, and you're going to have to build your resume. Obviously, probably working in law enforcement, But if we're going to be working types of investigations, we're talking about things like healthcare fraud. These are very good careers, but these types of investigations are very much the same. Sometimes they even do end up over on criminal sides if you get to the bottom of something and you see that there's a widespread fraud that's just really defrauding the company of tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's something that would end up maybe in SLED's hands, maybe even the FBI if we start making it up to federal level, defrauding the federal healthcare system, things of that nature. And so there's all kinds of different types of investigations. If we break that down further and we get away from the private and law enforcement, let's look at law enforcement, take a little more focus on that. You're going to see things like homicides, armed robberies, aggravated assaults, attempted murders, big-time drug investigations, things that where we're looking at someone who is not only a trafficker, but also, has several people under them that are doing trafficking for them or performing basically criminal enterprise type things where they're doing security on street corners and things of that nature. Once again, where patrol cannot get to the center of the problem. And so if the patrol can't get to the center of the problem, that's when you call in investigators to try to handle the criminal enterprise. So lots of different types of investigations. As far as careers go, we've kind of talked about that. The most common career is with local law enforcement. I've got a lot of people that come to me and say, "Hey, I want to do forensics. You worked federal law enforcement. I want to do forensics." Well, if you want to do forensics per se, when you're thinking like CSI, the TV show, federal law enforcement is probably not the way to go. The more likely way for you to go would be local law enforcement. I mean, they're the ones that are doing the types of homicide cases, the types of aggravated assaults where you're using things like blood spatter, where you're using things like fingerprinting and glass shatter forensics. I mean, there's all kinds of things that they have to do that I myself as a federal agent never did. We did forensics, but it was more like electronics forensics. It was more like interview and interrogation, witness statements, different surveillance out on the streets. So lots of good things. There's just two very different approaches. And if you're the type of person that gets into, more the scientific side, the DNA, the fingerprint analysis, the blood spatter analysis, you probably need to work local law enforcement, if not going state. Okay, so somewhere like SLED or North Carolina, the SBI, Tennessee has the TBI, Georgia has the GBI. Those types of agencies as well do a lot of those hands-on forensic science type of stuff. And so that kind of covers our basics overview. Let's move into the actual steps. And so on your note taker, steps 4 through I believe it's 12, we're going to talk about the steps to conducting an actual investigation. It's not rocket science, to be honest with you, to go over and look at how these different types of investigations need to be conducted. It's just very time consuming and it takes a lot out of you. But if you're thorough and you're organized and you're thoughtful about which techniques you use at which step, generally you can get really good results. And so, like I said, it's not rocket science, but it's also, not incredibly simple, especially making the decisions along the way. And that's a lot of what the course is going to be talking about, is how to make decisions on which methods to use at which juncture in a case. So our first step to conducting an investigation, it's point 4 there on your note taker. It says receive and develop information. You can't just investigate somebody for the heck of it. Like that is not kosher in American society. Those things have happened in the past, particularly with the FBI to maybe investigating someone like Martin Luther King Jr. Those types of things. We can't just go on hunches or gut feelings that somebody's up to no good. Many times courts have seen that as a violation of civil rights, and so therefore through time we have started to decide that we only need to investigate people when we have specific and articulate information that would allow us to develop some type of belief, and a very low belief, not probable cause or beyond a reasonable doubt. We wouldn't need to investigate if we have beyond a reasonable doubt, and we have very little investigating left to do if we have probable cause. So we're talking a very low level of proof here, but we need some type of specific and articulable facts that if someone were to come and review our files and say, hey, why did you investigate this person? You didn't find anything out. Well, if you look at the beginning, we had some information developed, yada, yada, there we are. So we have an investigation. Usually opening an investigation will require supervisory approval, but this depends on the agency or department, okay? So we'll talk about that here in just a second. The information that we receive and develop can come from either law enforcement or citizens. Okay, so if we have a patrol officer that says, hey, I'm seeing this guy at this certain time, at this certain location. I've arrested several people in that location. But every time I come around the corner, he's the first guy gone. I think he's up to no good. And here's what I think he may be doing. Okay, so we're going to take a statement from that officer. That's going to help us to basically open the investigation. We can also get citizens' observations. And it kind of gets tricky here because you start talking about anonymous tips. Anonymous tips are not very reliable, but we can use anonymous tips to go ahead and open an investigation to determine if there's more. We'll talk about that prelim investigation here shortly. Last thing, these tips, this information can also come not from an officer or a citizen's observation, but it can come from a call for service or for assistance. For example, hey, there's a body in the road. That's going to be pretty good information, obviously, to open up an investigation. And so at the end of the day, we can get phone calls that come in, emails, online tips, officers' phone calls, emails, any type of that reliable information. And again, reliable being, it can be an anonymous tip, it can be something very low scale, but any type of information we look at and say, hey, you know what, this person may know something here, and I think we may need to go and investigate further. That's when we decide to open an investigation and take it to a supervisor. The next step, conducting the preliminary investigation. The first thing I would want to do, especially if it was some type of covert investigation we wanted, as an undercover investigation that we want to conduct, I just do an open sources search. I'm going to go to police records. I'm going to look at, have we had contact with these individuals? Is there a crime problem on this side of town, as according to what this citizen told me? What is their Facebook? What is their Instagram? What is their TikTok? Or all these things? What do these things look like? Are they conducting illegal activity out in the open? Yeah, I know that's kind of one of those things where we sit here and say, well, nobody would do that. You'd be surprised. And so we're going to go through an open sources search. We may talk to different officers and conduct these very basic interviews where I may call a sergeant who works at patrol zone and says, hey, you've got these different types of break-ins. Do you have any information to believe that they're linked? And they may say, no, these are just guys out on the street, just a bunch of kids. It's happened before. I don't think it's any type of criminal enterprise. Versus, yeah, you know what? We've been seeing a lot more gang graffiti. We do believe this is related to a lot of recruitment that they've got going on. They're sending these young guys out to do these types of break-ins. Just those types of things. We're going to conduct interviews. We may go out into the neighborhood or the side of town, whatever it may be, and conduct interviews of civilians. Obviously, that depends on, do I want to go out in the open with this, or do I want to keep it undercover? Okay. And, it also depends on how did the case get started. Again, if it's a body in the road, yeah, obviously our first thing is going to be to interview people in the area. We're not going to be able to remain undercover on that because everybody's going to know that, well, there was a body in the road. So we're obviously doing some type of homicide investigation. At the end of your prelim, when you've kind of gotten a good feel for what you think may be going on, you got to make a decision. Am I going to end the case here, or am I going to continue it? If we go to a patrol officer in the zone, we've had this report of larcenies, and a citizen believes they're all connected because he heard from so-and-so that, hey, this is all part of a gang initiation, and they're bringing these young guys in via auto burglaries. We go to the sergeant, he says, that's not the case. I've got an informant in this gang. They're not bringing anybody in. I think I know who these 2 or 3 guys are. I think we've got a good beat on them. I think we've got it under control. We've arrested 2 of the 3 guys. I just don't really see anything here for you. So, okay, well, at that point, we're going to go ahead and close the case. We go to him, and he says, yeah, I've noticed more recruitment going on out in the streets. We've had some issues at the school with this and that and the other. Then we may say, okay, well, we're going to open up an investigation, or we're going to continue the investigation, and we're going to go ahead and kick it into a full investigation, which is our next step, 7.7. Your full investigation can go one of 2 ways. You can really get one that's just really hot from the beginning, and you're just going to have to get after it. Like this is where you ain't got much sleep. This is where you're beating on doors. You're doing search warrants. You're conducting interviews. You're operating all your informants. That's a very aggressive style investigation. This would be your body in the road. This would be some type of criminal enterprise moving into the neighborhood and just really wreaking havoc. This is where you say, okay, not only do I want to effect arrests at the end of this thing, but I also want these people to know that I'm coming after and put pressure on them. Those are really fun. those are the types of investigations that you see on TV and movies. But then there's this other type of investigation where it's like, okay, we don't have a whole lot to go on. Let's go ahead and start operating some informants and let's just see what they bring to us. Or let's just continue to observe from a distance. I don't really want to put my nose in this just yet, simply because I think they may hit the road and they're gone and they're just going to move to another side of town and we're going to start all over. And so you've got a very aggressive approach and you've got a wait and see approach. Me personally, I like the aggressive approach. The wait and see was never really my type of thing. I don't think it's many law enforcement's, but there's a place and time for it. You need to keep that in mind when you go into your full investigation. There's also a range of techniques to be used, and these range from very simple stuff from maybe just sitting outside a place and just watching, seeing who comes and goes, write down tag numbers, all the way down to trying to conduct undercover narcotics purchases in an apartment complex. And so there's a range of these techniques that may be used. Again, I go back to the scenario with, let's say that we find a body in the middle of the road. There's going to be a bunch of techniques used, and you may not be the person to even perform all these techniques. You may have to hand over some of your case over to agencies that have better forensics capability than you. And so there's going to be a bunch of techniques used. Keep everything on the table. Keep everything on the table. There's nothing you can't do as an investigator. And so, the limit is kind of the sky, especially in 2019, with a lot of the resources that are available that just don't cost a whole lot of money to conduct. The last thing there, I've pretty much covered that. Your investigation can be overt or covert. Okay? Overt, out in the open. We don't care who knows. Matter of fact, we hope we know that you know we're coming from. We're trying to put pressure on you, make you make mistakes, versus covert, where we don't want somebody to know. We need you to keep doing what you're doing because we're collecting evidence on the entire criminal enterprise, all of your associates, maybe even just more evidence on you because we just don't have enough yet. But we feel like if you know, then that's going to totally end everything and we're not going to be able to get anything else, and at this point it would become a cold case. And so you've got that option. Am I going to operate this in the open or am I going to keep it on the down low? So that leads us to our next step. Once we've finished, and really you've never finished your full investigation, you're going to see that here in a little bit. But once we feel like we've gotten to the point to where, okay, I'm not sure we're going to get a whole lot more out of this. At this point, let's make a case. And that's what that first point says there. Put together your case, okay? You're going to keep the laws in mind as you're putting these cases together. What different statutes do I need to put on which person? And that's how you're going to make your case. Okay, so you may have collected 30 pieces of evidence on one person via interviews, this, that, and the other. 28 of them don't add up to anything, but there's those two, and those add up to what we need to put the checklist of the statute in mind. Let's say, an attempted murder. Okay, so something like that, we've got to keep in mind what is it that makes our case for that specific statute. And so we're going to pull and part those things together, and you're going to put those into some type of product. Like it needs to be something presentable to the prosecutor, to your supervisor. Just going in and saying, hey, I've got this, this, and this off the top of your head, you may be able to do that. You may be comfortable with that. Me, if I'm a prosecutor or if I'm your supervisor and we're getting ready to charge somebody with a class ABC felony, I need to see what you got. I want to see what you got before we send you to the next part of how we're going to charge this person. And so however you like to do it, however you're best with it, it may be the type of note-taker thing that I've got right here where you just list out the file numbers of what it is you've got, maybe a PowerPoint, maybe some type of chart. And so it's kind of up to you how you want to do that, how you want to present your case to your supervisor and the prosecutor you're going to be working with to adjudicate the case. And so the next step is going to be this charging conference, and that's where you're going to take your case. Again, to kind of maybe revert back to the last step, your prosecutor and your supervisor may say, this is how we want it done. If that's how they want it, you don't matter anymore. You do it how they want it. Okay, so you're going to take whatever product this is to them, and you're going to make decisions about who gets charged with what. This is a very give and take type atmosphere. You know, you're going to walk in thinking, well, we're going to charge these people with this, and you may leave with something you didn't count on. So you may charge more, you may charge less. But again, this decision really kind of rests on the prosecutor's shoulders because they are the ones that are going to have to take this in front of a judge and jury, not you. You know, you will be there for every step of the way. You will assist them, and you know, you will be the linchpin of the case. But at the end of the day, how it gets charged comes down to their professional opinion. And so you need to rely on that, stick with it, and go with it. The two ways we're mostly going to charge would either be via grand jury or via information. And these are things you've covered in other classes. But again, that case per se, that product that you put together will work really well for either way. That gives either the grand jury or the prosecutor the available information that they need in a condensed format to say, yeah, bam, you nailed this statute, you've got that. Or if we have to go back to the full investigation stage and rewind it, it allows them to look and say, you don't have enough here. If you get me this, then I will charge them with that, and we'll be good to go. And so that's part of the charging conference. We may reboot, but for the most part, we're going to walk out and say we're charging these people with these things. Depending on the severity of the case, it depends on who's present. I've done charging conferences where we sat with some very, very important attorneys. They're all important, but I'm saying people that were very high in the chain of command. And I've done cases that were pretty run-of-the-mill where you're working with just the one prosecutor who's going to be taking the case for you. And so maybe their supervisor, sometimes your supervisor wants to be present. But again, it just kind of depends on the case. And so as a young investigator, hopefully you're not sitting in front of all these people just yet. You're able to cut your teeth on a couple of little things here and there. It kind of gives you the idea of how this charging conference goes, because it is incredibly important that you have your P's and Q's together. Next step, hopefully after your charging conference and you've got several signed warrants, you can go out and make arrests. And this needs to be done in an organized format. You need to have a plan, because if you're arresting multiple people out of this one investigation, you're going to want to conduct interrogations. This is going to help you, and again, this goes back to full investigation. Your full investigation doesn't end until people are sentenced and all the appeals are done. Then you can close the case. Up until then, you're still fully investigating everything. And so when you make these arrests, you're going to want to conduct accusatory interrogations, meaning you did it, I know you did it, here's how I know you did it, fill in the gaps, sew up this case on this guy, tell me about this person, how did you do this, sew up the case on yourself. A lot of people say, well, why in the world would you sit in a chair and tell somebody you did something? Well, that's the purpose of the accusatory interrogation. And to be quite honest, if your goose is cooked, it helps to cooperate from the beginning. You know, you're going to, in all likelihood, get a better deal if there's a deal to be had. And so we want that person to go ahead and get on the right side of the history from day one. Even if they don't get on the right side of the history, I hope that you portray how much their goose is cooked to them so that they are going to be persuaded later on to plead guilty. We can get away from the trial. That person takes what's best for them and gets a plea deal, and we move on to the next case, not have to worry about trial. But if they choose to go to trial, we'll talk about that here in a second. They absolutely have that right. It's one of the best rights under our United States Constitution, and it keeps everything in check, just like it should. You also, on those days that you make arrests, may want to do search warrants that you couldn't before. So you said, hey, this was a covert investigation. I couldn't serve a search warrant at the ringleader's house or the lead suspect, whoever it may be. Let's go ahead and do that search warrant today. Because now, hey, cat's out of the bag. We're going to arrest 5, 6 people that are connected to this one homicide. Let's go ahead and conduct that search of that storage space we never really want to mess with. Let's go ahead and get in there and see what's in there. So on those days, you're going to do that as well. So after you've made your arrest, at that time, it's time for their due process rights to kick in. Again, very important parts of our Constitution that we're all guaranteed if we're ever accused of a crime. During the due process, and again, this class isn't necessarily about due process. I hope that you have a good grasp on that from other classes. But during the conduct of due process for these defendants, number one, you're going to look at prosecutor's requests. They're going to ask you, whoa, we need to, this guy said this in this interrogation, and this guy said this. These two things contradict each other. I need you to prove whether that's true or false so that we can know who to give the better deal to, who is more culpable for this crime. So at that point, you go out, conduct interviews, maybe of the two suspects, follow up interrogations. Obviously, with their attorney present, you can't go, once their Sixth Amendment rights have attached to them, you can't go back and speak to them without approval from their attorney. And I would always suggest, man, have either the prosecutor or defense attorney there for that type of questioning. That can get a bit squirrely. You don't want to mess up your case there. The next thing would be discovery. If you're talking a very complex case, man, you're talking a heck of a process. Something I never really knew about until I got into law enforcement and started conducting investigations. Their right to discovery, they have the right to look at every single thing that is relevant to the case. And if you're talking a multi-month investigation, you're talking reams and reams of documents. And so that's going to be a big pain on you. And you're kind of wondering, well, wouldn't that be easy? I'll just print off the case file and here you go. You need to go through that. And you need to make sure that during a discovery that every single thing is captured. Because if you miss something, that's it. As in, drop the charges. And then you're probably going to be in a job. So the discovery process is painstaking. But I'll tell you this, you won't really know your case until you do discovery. And you may say, well, I've already organized my information, but you're gonna find things during discovery that you're like, you know what, I forgot about that. We need to add that. And you may even come across something where you're like, you know what, I think we may be able to represent this case to the prosecutor and recharge and get another charge on these people. So very interesting process is discovery. Last thing, hearings and trial subpoenas and testimony. Obviously, these are a big deal. You get a lot of hearings where the prosecutor may challenge an interrogation and say, hey, you know what, that interrogation, you didn't properly Mirandize my defendant, and we need to have a hearing to get to the bottom of this. And so at that point, it's like a mini trial of your technique. And so you're going to have to prove from front to back that I properly Mirandized this person. This statement is absolutely admissible at trial. You better hope you did it right. And so you're going to present that. And again, we're not putting on trial guilt or innocence of the person. We're just putting on trial your investigative technique and whether or not you did it correctly. And so obviously, that's where it's nice to make sure that throughout the investigation, you've had an attorney on board so that anytime you get into something where you're like, hey, I don't really know whether I need to make sure that we're going to do this properly, have an attorney that answers the phone. That's very valuable to your investigative career. And so the last step is said, and I've kind of alluded to this several times already, continue the investigation as needed. As needed, may need to continue investigating to clear charging your remaining suspects. You know, there's always that one, especially with narcotics investigations, where you're like, yeah, I always saw you around, but I never really was able to get you. As you go through your interrogations, somebody may drop a dime on that guy and say, you know what, on these 3 dates I bought from him, and on these 2 dates he bought from me, and he brought me this. You know what, let's go back, let's look at those things. Do we have any surveillance video of him showing up on those dates? Do we have phone records of that person? Whatever it may be, but you're going to have to continue investigating. And at the end of the day, you may go back and say, well, there's still not enough to get Johnny. Or you may say, boom, we got Johnny. Let's go back to step number 9, do our charging conference, make our arrest, go through due process with Johnny now. Last thing, keep in mind, no case is ever perfect. In the United States, one of the greatest rights that you have is the right to a jury trial, because that means that people who don't do this for a living, who don't take things for granted, who don't jump to assumptions when it comes to things like search warrants and statements made to the police, they're going to look at this thing and they're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and that's a great thing. That's a good thing for a constitution. But keep in mind that these, again, are lay people, and you're going to have to keep striving until the whole thing is complete to try to make the perfect case. Even though you'll never make a perfect case. That doesn't exist. So that's pretty much a basic overview of investigations. Obviously, I've made it sound incredibly simple. I've pretty much laid out how to conduct investigations in 25 minutes. Obviously, you're not ready to do that, but I think you do have the ability to apply this in a very simplistic format. This framework would allow you to conduct an investigation in a whole lot of different places for a whole lot of different jobs in a whole lot of different situations. And so it's always a good starting place. And so each one of these bullet points, we're going to try to work through a lot of these things throughout the semester. I think you'll gain a lot from it, and I think towards the end of the semester you'll have a pretty good grasp on what it would be like to be an investigator in the state of South Carolina. So if you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Obviously, the practical exercise is, I think, a good exercise. If you've got any questions on that assignment, feel free to email as well. Thanks again for tuning in. Look forward to the rest of the semester with y'all.